Yeah, I mean, to your point, trillions of dollars are being invested into healthcare innovation. And statistically, and this is not in healthcare, but even outside of healthcare, statistically, only 95% of innovations fail. So
Well, hey, Dr. Roxie, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm doing great, Rafi. Good to be here.
Thanks for coming on the show. I'm looking forward to talking with you about commercialization, kind of like taking the idea from maybe just idea to startup to actually getting this in the hands of consumers. But before we do that, tell us a little bit about yourself, your interesting PhD, and then what brought you to what you're doing now.
Sure, absolutely. So, my background is in marketing. I've been a practitioner of marketing for over 2 decades now. And I launched Legacy DNA as a healthcare marketing agency about 13 years ago. And when I graduated with my doctorate in business in 2017, I started to transform that company and really more focus beyond marketing to more of commercialization. My doctorate is in commercializing technology innovation in healthcare. I've had some of my work published in some peer-reviewed journals. I took all of my research and doctorate work and published a book, How Health Innovators Maximize Market Success. I also host and produce my own podcast show called The Health Innovator Show for the last 5 years. Also, kind of partnered with you in trying to transform the industry and help more tech innovators be successful. And so, everything that I do is kind of taking those unique insights that I gained from that doctoral journey and also my experience and putting that into methodologies and frameworks to help health tech founders be able to increase their chances of success.
Yeah. I don't know if you know off the top of your head, but it seems like there's, especially maybe 2021, 22, and even in the early part of 2023, a lot of money got spent by VC firms and all kinds of stuff investing in some of these healthcare technology companies. And it seems like, at least on my end, like not a lot of them were super, super successful, right? Like, do you know on the top of your head, like how many on average healthcare tech startups actually make it versus those that end up just fizzing out?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, to your point, trillions of dollars are being invested into healthcare innovation. And statistically, and this is not in healthcare, but even outside of healthcare, statistically, only 95% of innovations fail. So
Yeah.
only 5% actually succeed. And then when you take into consider healthcare with all the additional complexities of regulatory and reimbursement, that percentage of potential success is even smaller. So that's why the work that you're doing, the work that we're doing is so important. So that way those investments actually start to transform healthcare and, generate an ROI for everybody.
Yeah, exactly. So then tell us a little bit about, since your doctorate is in this, what is commercialization? I think for most people that get like maybe they're a tech founder or something like that, they were just worried about building the product or building the software. It's their baby. But when you say commercialization, like people's eyes start glazing over. So what is commercialization?
Right. Yeah. So, it's funny because you're right. Commercialization is a subset of many, many decisions that are made and that they're all interrelated and interconnected. And together they make the commercialization plan or the commercialization process. And so a lot of times, like you said, tech innovators will think of product and they'll think of launch. And those
Yeah.
are like really the main two functions that they're mostly concerned about. And within a launch, you might have the function of marketing. And marketing is still a part of commercialization, but I was describing it the other day as almost like a Russian doll set. If you took that visualization, the little small doll in the center is going to be the marketing. And on top of that, you would have like product. And then on top of that, you would have sales. And then you would have customer experience. And then you would have your go-to-market strategy. And then you would have commercialization. Your biggest doll would be your business strategy. But commercialization is basically all the decisions that you're making to take a solution from an idea to some type of financial ROI and significant customer adoption. And that goes, the biggest distinctions, I think, are the timing that you start to think about this. A lot of times we don't think about launching something until the product's ready to
Yeah.
be launched into the marketplace. Whereas commercialization, those decisions should be made way, way, way earlier on, kind of figuring,
It's like
taking in
informing development. Like if this is a strategy, it doesn't make sense to add this feature or something.
and your business model. So like, I mean, this is something that I think, is often overlooked is, how am I going to make money from this? There's so many people, especially in healthcare, health tech, that are really passionate about the patients that they want to serve or the cause that they want to solve for, and really think that, oh, well, I'm going to build something great and do a good thing and the money's going to come. And they're not
Yeah.
necessarily fleshing out like that reimbursement pathway, which is so critical. So, what, if you compare the searches, because when I graduated in 2018, I was like, woohoo, I have this like strong doctorate behind me. I'm going to like transform the whole company. And all we're going to talk about is commercialization, because nobody really respects marketing in healthcare anyway.
Yeah.
And so, thinking that that was going to be a game changer for us achieving our own hockey stick growth. And I was like, wait a minute. When I'm talking to people about commercialization, it's eyes glazed over and they're like, I don't really even know what she's saying.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. The search volume for marketing is way higher than the search volume for commercialization. And what I've found out is that even when people are searching commercialization, they're searching the phrase is, what is commercialization?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So how many people or clients have you worked with then that like they've gotten this far down the path and they're like having to restructure or rebuild? Is it one of those things like if you get started off this path one way and then you got to shift, like this can cause
Yeah.
issues for the whole company, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The number one reason for failure is that there's no market need.
Yeah.
And like, that's something for us to all really seriously consider. We have so many biases as human beings that we think everyone is going to love our solution, because especially when we've experienced the problem personally, we think that it's very pervasive. Or even if that problem is very pervasive, it does not mean that anyone is interested in exchanging dollars to solve it right now. So
Yeah.
being able to go through that discovery process and that validation of demand is so important. But, honestly, health tech innovators don't really like it because it takes longer and it costs more. And we believe everyone's going to love our stuff. So we just build it and then we launch it. And then when it doesn't
Yeah.
sell, sometimes we're like, oh, I was just too early.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes it could be something like the same tool positioned a different way is going to knock it out of the park, like, oh, you just had the wrong payer or the wrong market or the wrong whatever. So, like it kind of in that vein, what steps are or should some of these tech founders take to kind of make sure that, okay, we're on the right path. We've chosen the right, maybe the market, like maybe even identifying the potential market is a big deal, right? Like what steps should be taken at the early outset of an idea to make sure that you're on the right path for developing a product or a device or something?
Definitely. So in my mind, the first phase of that is that path to profit. If you can't figure out the path to profit, then really what are we doing, right? So in that path to profit phase, it's really being able to map out what are your resources and capabilities. How are you, which of those are you able to kind of build a competitive advantage around? Being able to map out the competitor landscape and really be able to identify what's that white space. Where is it that you can position yourself and kind of own that subset of the market, and aligning that with the organizational's resources and capabilities. And that really starts to formulate that path to profit. Another really important component of it is the actual business model. I call it like a 3 horizon framework that's used, and really being able to map out the different phases of the business that the visionary has. And this is really important because a lot of times we health tech innovators will have a really big vision
Yes,
of how they
huge.
want to change the world. and struggle with being able to break that apart into, okay, this is how we're going to make money now in phase one or horizon one. This is how we're going to make money in horizon two. And then maybe horizon three is that big dream of how they're going to change the world. But when you really map it out into those three horizons, it gives investors a lot more confidence in your ability to successfully commercialize an innovation when you have a path to profit that's then going to fuel the next phases of evolution of the business.
Yeah.
And it can be hard for a health tech innovator who struggles with, but that's not what I want to do. That's not my whole vision. And having to really make peace with, but this is how I'm going to best be able to make money now and then be able to grow into it. And what I've found is that when you're working with a health tech innovator and they actually see the three horizons mapped out, this is who I'm serving, this is what I'm delivering, this is how I'm making money, then all of a sudden that gives them peace of mind that, yes, I do have a path to achieving my big vision. And I also have a path to getting some cash flow in the door.
Yeah. Yeah. I think a big piece right there is just that like having a stable foundation. Like it doesn't matter if you have a grand vision if you run out of money 3 years before you get there, right? Right.
Yeah, and also, sometimes innovators will think when I'm pitching to potential investors that that grand vision is what's going to motivate them to invest. And sometimes it is the case, but often it is really being able to show that path to profit. How are you going to incrementally make money to substantiate the investment and the funding that they're giving you? And so just being able to show I've got this gigantic total addressable market, and I'm going to
Yeah.
service diabetes and heart disease, and I can like, who's your, kind of weaving into the other question that you asked around target market, who's your target market? Everyone. I
Everyone
can
is. Yeah.
providers, and I can help these 12 different therapies. And a lot of times innovators will think that that gives people investors confidence that they're going to be able to make a lot of money because you can serve a lot of people with a lot of things. And really all it does is dilute confidence in that you're going to be able to do anything because you're trying to be all things to too many people.
Yeah, I'll tell clients all the time. I'm like, listen, yeah, you can serve the entire like physical therapy industry, but let's focus on like who are the people that are paying you now, and how are you going to get more of them? Like that's what investors really want to see, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah.
it's easy in healthcare because there's so many people that are sick or that need the innovation or whatever it is.
Yeah, absolutely. I talk a lot about the bowling pin strategy and really being able to pick. You can kind of think of that as each potential market segment being represented in a bowling
Yeah.
pin. Sometimes we try to knock them all down at the same time, which, as we know, if you've ever been bowling, like
Yeah.
getting a strike is really hard. But it's a lot easier if you just try to knock down the front pin, and then
Yeah.
you use that momentum and leverage to knock down the next pin, and so on. And especially if you are an early stage innovator or an even emergent innovator, that you've got limited bandwidth, attention, and usually financial resources. So being able to spreading that out of, I'm trying to win a business in Singapore and China and the US, and each one is even a slightly different variation of what that solution might look like, is really a losing strategy. It's really being able to pick out who is going to be that target market first, and aligning all of your resources and focus toward knocking down that first pin. And then you can expand into those other markets or solving those other problems for that existing market.
Yeah. Well, and how much of this is changed too? I'm thinking now of a couple clients that I've worked with in the past. Like their end game was building the business to a certain level and then being acquired by maybe one of their competitors or whatever. They're building a strategic advantage, or they're going to be a platform that gets acquired. Like part of the commercialization process, does that include like understanding that end game? Like our end game is to dominate the market and be like the device to do X or the innovation to do X, or like our plan is to build this to a point where one of these other bigger players is going to want us. Like how much of that plays into, okay, this is where the dollars get spent and this is where we're focusing our current market strategy or whatever it is?
Absolutely. I mean, I think like Stephen Covey always said, begin with the end in mind, right? So we need to be able to understand what our ultimate end game is or what our goal for our end game is. But I also think holding that loosely because things might evolve over time. What I find what happens with innovators when we're not defining that end game up front is that we tend to be a little bit more loosey-goosey with managing the business and the growth of the business, because maybe we don't have big financial aspirations, or we're not
Yeah.
trying to go IPO or sell it. We want to be able to just run this business, for the rest of my life kind of thing. And that puts us at risk of being able of not adhering to some of the best practices to actually build a sustainable business. So even if you end up wanting to run the business and never IPO, never sell it, that you still want to have all of the same best practices that would have been necessary to actually get to those next phases of your exit strategy.
Yeah. Well, and maybe you can walk us through some of those best practices, because I think like one of the biggest, not one of the biggest risks, but a big risks for an organization that I've seen is like they take on a lot of capital and it ends up crushing them, because then they end up making, either stupid decisions or there's this pressure from outside investors now to get an ROI, and they end up making concessions, and then they end up like running a business they don't want. So before they do that, and before that mistake is made, starting with that end in mind, like what are some of those best practices that maybe a healthcare tech founder should be thinking about, like when they're building the actual business?
Sure. It makes me think of some of the practices that are in the book that's not necessarily dedicated to healthcare, but built to sell,
Oh,
right? Like
yes. Yeah. Yeah.
building an organization to sell it. If you're following that model, you're putting into practices like profit margin, like profitability and profit
Yeah.
margin, right? Like
It's
you're
part
never
of the
going to
business model.
right, you're never going to be able to, because again, some of these, so often, the business is almost like an expensive hobby or
Yeah.
expensive passion, because we're talking about solving problems that have so much human appeal, right? It's usually a very much of a cause and a mission and a
Yeah.
purpose, and that founder can't imagine not being able to fix this in healthcare because so many lives are at stake. And so, just really being able to make sure that you are managing your books, managing your profitability, and your P&L, because those would be things that you would normally have to do if you were going to sell your organization. Whereas you might be able to kind of like skirt around, I got money in the bank,
Yeah.
so I'm good, and not necessarily assessing all of the things that you're doing, that maybe are good, but what are the ones that are actually the most profitable?
Yeah.
Might help, having that profit lens can help you make a lot more decisions. And sometimes we don't have that profit lens if we're not building something that we plan to sell, even if we don't, you
Yeah,
know.
it almost reminds me of that book, Islands of Profit in a Sea of Red Ink. It's like how many businesses are running things and they look profitable, but if you look under the hood, it's like, man, you're bleeding money here, here, and there.
Right.
And it's like they said, they're
Yeah.
trying to fix all this problem, and it's an expensive hobby rather than it is a lean business or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And really being able to kind of look in the mirror, or, be faced with the reality of like, I might like something, I might be passionate about something, but if it is a cost center and not a profit center, then I might need to make some hard decisions if I want to have a sustainable business that I might be able to sell in the future.
Yeah. Well, and in your experience, how easy of a decision, or how difficult of a decision is that for like a tech founder who's, in this zone where they're trying to solve all these problems, and it is emotional, and there's usually a personal element involved, like to have to make those decisions of, okay, I've got to cut this department or this, initiative or whatever. Like that can be a very difficult decision, right?
Yeah, and I think it's really hard for health tech innovators because when you're in that early stage, and this is a good thing, right? You're talking to as many people as possible because you don't know who's going to give you funding. You don't know who's going to introduce you to that person that's going to be the game changer for your company, right? That's going to, who's going to buy your solution. So you're networking all angles, and you're looking, I mean, I've talked to innovators that are part of several different accelerator programs programs and have advisors and board of directors. And so
Yeah.
they've got so many people that are speaking all of these different things into their life, into their business. So it's really, sometimes, people are like changing with the wind of whoever's the advisor that they spoke to last, which can be very detrimental. And so, one advisor might tell you, oh, you should go after this market, and you really don't want to service that market. So it can be a hard decision for the innovator of determining, like, what are these principles that I'm going to hold tightly to. So I make sure that I'm not building a business that everyone else thinks that I should build, but I'm building a business that I want. But I'm also balancing that with listening to great feedback to adapt and pivot as I need to have a successful, sustainable company. And so the way that I usually guide people is the why should never change, the mission,
Yeah.
right? But how you accomplish it can change and fluctuate. And that's the kind of feedback that you would want to be listening to kind of maybe adapt your business model or adapt your go-to-market strategy based upon that feedback. But if somebody's giving you feedback that really changes like your core purpose of why you're doing what you're doing, then you need to push back and say, that's not the business that I want to actually build.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and how much of that too comes from like the funding source? Like, I'm sure taking money from, I've never started a healthcare technology startup or anything like that, but I have plenty of clients who have gotten, in bed with is the bad word, but they've taken money
Yeah.
from some investor and now they're like, man, this is changing the business more than I want to. So
Yeah.
when it comes to that, like the whole commercialization process, and now we're going to bring in outside investors or capital to make this business work, like how much of almost a vetting needs to be done on the part of the startup to make sure that they're getting maybe a good partner is not the right word, but an investment source or capital source that's going to be good for them strategically in the long run as well, and maybe not make them make concessions on some of those principles or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And really being able to do the homework of really documenting, not just in your head or in your gut instinct, but documenting what are these absolutes that are like non-negotiables for your business, and using that as a lens when you're going out and you're courting these and potential investors or even advisors, to make sure, and then using that, whereas you're interviewing them and qualifying them
Yeah.
just as much as they are with you, that should be some kind of equal power and leverage at that. I mean, of course, it's easier said than done when you're just trying to get, the next 250K to make payroll when you've got, so
Yeah.
many families and lives that are relying on you. But it's really, really critical, because there are a lot of times where you want to say no, even when it would be a lot easier to say yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I have that conversation every now and then with folks. I'm like, listen, this is as much it's two professional individuals and organizations discerning whether or not it even makes sense to do business together. And just because you need the money doesn't necessarily mean the answer is always yes.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Whether they believe in a B2B or a B2C strategy, whether they're looking to cash out in a year or two, or whether they're in this in the long run. I mean, there's so many different factors that you want to craft questions around to make sure that you're selecting somebody that's the right fit for your vision.
Awesome. I guess what are some of the big things that startups should be looking at when they're looking at taking that next step into funding? Like maybe, there's like, we can go to VC, or we can do like some of these crowdfunding measures, or like small investors, small time investors, maybe with accreditation, or maybe there are a bunch of doctors investing in the product. Like, is one better than the other? Does it kind of depend on what the end goal is?
I think it depends on the type of business.
Yeah.
So we have a client that we're working with right now, who's developed a product that's used in, how do I describe this? That's used for a very specific type of patient and a very specific moment or time in that care continuum. So they're not going to be ideal for crowdfunding because those people that would normally invest in that are not going to, they're not the average consumer
Yeah.
that, so like it's really is a product that's only going to be right for you if you're having surgery and a very specific kind of surgery. So it doesn't make sense for them to do the crowdfunding path because it's not like it's going to be, oh, well, you'll get early access to this product if you invest in the company, or you'll get more of it. You're not going to need it
Yeah.
if you don't have the surgery. So it really does. I mean, I would say be creative, and leave all of the options on the table, and for consideration, and then look at the type of business that you have and make sure that you're choosing the ones that are going to be the best fit for you. And a lot of times too, it also depends on what kind of connections and network you have that's going to determine some of the different financial funding pathways that are available to you.
Yeah. Cool deal. Um, let's see here. Well, we're getting near the bottom of the hour here. So I always ask this, if there's like one or two main points you would want a listener to walk away with from the episode, specifically around like commercializing an innovative idea or a business, what would they be?
Don't underestimate the power of story. Most innovators that I come across, they have no story, or they have a terrible story. If Too often health tech innovators are looking at their competitors and mimicking that, and that's never a winning strategy. And in healthcare, there's so many times that we're using jargon and we're really just talking about who we are, how awesome we are, and what we do. And we really need to flip that and focus on what is the value proposition. How are
Mm-hmm.
we clearly and succinctly communicating that in a compelling way? And how does that also fit into the brand story? The brand story should be part of that differentiation. You think of the brand story for Chipotle is very different than the brand story for Taco Bell. And
Yeah.
because of that, they can both be in the same space, but they can also be targeting a very different customer segment. And so the story becomes really important. Story has a huge effect in how much money you raise and whether you actually have paying clients or how many paying clients you have. So I think being able to invest in story is really critical. Another component of that is the offer. I can't tell you how many times that health tech innovators don't even have an offer, even if they're really clear on the value proposition, not a quantifiable offer on what's in it for you. So it might
Yeah.
say like, generically, like, well, we help people, A, B, and C people lower cost and increase revenue. Well, everybody says that.
Exactly. Yeah.
How can you put a brand promise and a guarantee behind it? So where you're saying that you're going to increase revenue by X% by X time frame, or you're going to lower cost by X, right? And sometimes you've got to have a couple of wins under your belt to be able to have some very specific quantifiable claims with your offer that you can stand behind. But this is something that I think is too often overlooked in our industry. And there's
Yeah.
so many more we could talk about.
Well, I mean, that leads right into this. So where can people find out more about you? You mentioned the book, you mentioned the legacy DNA. So where can people find you, connect with you, learn more about your commercialization service? And then I think the book title is How Health Innovators Maximize Market Success, right?
Yes, it is. So I'm on every social media platform, just
All the
about. If you
places.
look up Dr. Roxie Mooney, LinkedIn, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, any of those channels, you can find my content and reach out to me. If you have any questions, happy to support you. I also have a Health Innovators community with an online learning platform. So there's a lot of opportunity to really be able to access a lot of my strategies and framework and content for free. So, if anybody's interested, reach out and, let's explore how we can collaborate.
Awesome. Cool deal. Well, Roxie, thanks so much for being on the show.
You got it. Thank you so much for having me. It was a great conversation.
Yeah.